Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his cargo ship toward the mining station. The old freighter hummed and shook like it always did, but she still flew. He had been making supply runs to Epsilon 7 for 3 years now. It was boring work, but it paid well enough to keep food on the table and fuel in the tanks. His co-pilot, Tony Martinez, looked up from his coffee. "Should be there in 20 minutes, Jake. Same old delivery run." Jake nodded and checked the communication panel. Something felt wrong. Usually the station would have contacted them by now to confirm their arrival. The silence made him nervous. "Try calling them again," Jake said. Tony pressed the communication button. "Epsilon 7, this is cargo ship Lucky Star requesting docking permission." He waited. Nothing but static came through the speakers. Jake frowned and pushed the ship faster. As they got closer to the station, he could see something was very wrong. Parts of the station were dark. Smoke drifted from several sections. Worst of all, he could see the sleek black ships of Zephyrian raiders attached to the station like parasites. "Oh no," Tony whispered. "We need to get out of here right now." Jake's hands tightened on the controls. Everyone in human space knew about the Zephyrians. They were tall, pale aliens with sharp features and cold eyes. They attacked human settlements to steal supplies and take people as slaves. His own sister had been taken by raiders when she was just 16. He never saw her again. But as Jake started to turn the ship around, his scanner picked up a distress signal. It was weak and coming from deep inside the station. Someone was still alive in there. "Jake, don't even think about it," Tony said, reading his friend's expression. "We can't help anyone if we're dead or captured." Jake stared at the damaged station. He thought about his sister and all the other people who had been taken by raiders. He thought about how no one had been there to help them. His jaw set in a hard line. "I'm going in," he said. "You're crazy. There could be dozens of raiders in there. Maybe. But someone is calling for help." Jake started flying toward the station's emergency docking bay. "Get the medical kit ready." Tony shook his head but did as he was told. They had been flying together for 5 years. He knew Jake well enough to know there was no changing his mind once he decided to help someone. Jake docked the ship as quietly as possible. The station's emergency systems were still working, so they had air and artificial gravity. But the lights flickered, and Jake could hear the sound of metal creaking under stress. They put on their emergency suits and grabbed their weapons. Jake carried a simple pulse rifle, nothing fancy. They followed the distress signal through empty corridors filled with debris. The raiders had clearly been through here, taking everything valuable. The signal led them to the medical bay. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, blocking most of the room. Jake could hear someone moving weakly under the rubble. "Help me move this," he said to Tony. They lifted away chunks of metal and plastic. Underneath, Jake found something that made him freeze. It was a Zephyrian, but not like any raider he had ever seen. This one was small and young, probably female based on her build. She wore simple civilian clothes, not the black armor of a raider. Blood covered her pale skin, and one of her legs was badly twisted. "Jake, step away from that thing," Tony said, raising his weapon. The alien's large dark eyes opened and looked at Jake. She said something in her own language, her voice barely a whisper. She was clearly dying. Jake had never seen fear like that in a Zephyrian's eyes before. Raiders were always confident and cruel. This one looked terrified and in pain, just like any human would be in the same situation. "She's not a raider," Jake said softly. "How can you tell? They all look the same to me." Jake knelt down next to the injured alien. She flinched away from him at first, then seemed to realize he was trying to help. Her eyes followed his movements as he carefully checked her injuries. Look at her clothes. Look at her hands. No weapons, no armor. She was probably working here when the raiders attacked. Jake gently touched her wounded leg. She cried out in pain. "We need to get her to the ship." "Are you insane?" "That's a Zephyrian. Her people killed your sister." Jake looked at the alien's face again. She was so young, probably not much older than his sister had been. This one didn't kill anyone. She's just scared and hurt. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. The raiders were coming back. Jake quickly scooped the alien into his arms. She was surprisingly light and she didn't fight him. Instead, she wrapped her thin arms around his neck like a child seeking comfort. They ran back toward their ship as fast as they could. Behind them, Jake could hear angry voices in the Zephyrian language. The raiders had discovered they were there. "Move, move, move," Tony shouted as he fired his weapon at the pursuing aliens. Jake carried the wounded Zephyrian into their ship and placed her carefully on the medical table. She looked up at him with those large, dark eyes and whispered something he couldn't understand. Then she passed out from her injuries. Tony jumped into the pilot's seat and started the engines. "I hope you know what you're doing, Jake." Laser fire hit their ship as they pulled away from the station. The raiders were shooting at them, angry that their prey was escaping. Jake strapped himself in and held on to the medical table to keep the unconscious alien from falling off. "Where are we going?" Tony asked as he pushed the ship to maximum speed. Jake looked down at the pale face of the alien he had just saved. She looked so peaceful now, like she was just sleeping. "Earth, we're taking her to Earth." "Earth? Jake, they'll throw us both in prison. You can't bring an enemy alien to Earth. She's not an enemy. She's a victim." Jake gently brushed a strand of white hair away from her face. "Look at her, Tony. She's just a kid who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time." Tony sighed but set their course for Earth. "You're either the bravest man I know or the biggest fool in the galaxy," Jake smiled as he watched over his unconscious passenger. "Maybe both." The alien stirred slightly in her sleep and murmured something in her native language. Jake didn't understand the words, but somehow he felt like she was thanking him. He had no idea that he had just changed the course of galactic history. The courtroom was packed with reporters and military officers. Jake sat at a metal table, still wearing his simple cargo pilot uniform. He felt out of place among all the fancy uniforms and suits. Across from him, Colonel Sam Hayes shuffled through a stack of papers with an angry expression. "Captain Morrison," the colonel said, "you stand accused of bringing an enemy alien onto Earth without permission. This is a serious crime that could result in 20 years in prison." Jake kept his voice calm. "Sir, she was dying. I couldn't just leave her there. You should have taken her to a neutral station. Instead, you brought a potential spy directly to our home planet." The colonel stood up and pointed at Jake. "Your actions have put millions of human lives at risk." Dr. Lisa Chen, the alien's doctor, stood up from her seat. "Colonel Hayes, I need to speak." The judge nodded at her. Dr. Chen was a small woman with kind eyes who had spent the last 2 weeks treating the Zephyrian. She walked to the witness stand with confidence. "The alien's name is Lyra," Dr. Chen said. "She has told us everything about the raider attack on the station. More importantly, she has given us information that will save many human lives." Colonel Hayes frowned. "What kind of information?" Lyra was not working with the raiders. She was running away from them. She is part of a secret group of Zephyrians who oppose their empire's slave trade. She knows the locations of hidden raider bases and their attack plans. The courtroom buzzed with surprised voices. Jake looked up with interest. He had visited Lyra every day in the hospital, but she had been too weak to talk much. Dr. Chen continued, "Using her information, our military has already stopped 3 planned attacks on human colonies. We have also rescued over 200 human slaves from a secret prison camp." Colonel Hayes sat down heavily. "Are you certain she's telling the truth?" "Everything she has told us has been accurate. She even gave us the codes to disable Zephyrian ships. Our test yesterday was completely successful." The judge looked at Jake with new interest. "Captain Morrison, it seems your decision to save this alien has had unexpected benefits." Jake nodded but didn't smile. "I didn't save her because I thought she had information. I saved her because it was the right thing to do." After the trial, Jake was found not guilty. Instead of prison, he received a medal for his service to humanity. But he didn't care about the medal. He just wanted to visit Lyra again. The hospital room was bright and clean. Lyra sat up in bed looking much better than when Jake had first found her. Her broken leg was healing well and the color had returned to her pale skin. She was reading a book about human history when Jake walked in. "Hello, Jake," she said in careful English. She had been learning the language with amazing speed. "Hi, Lyra. How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you." She set down her book and looked at him with those large, dark eyes. "Dr. Chen told me about the trial. I am sorry it happened because of me." Jake pulled up a chair next to her bed. "Don't be sorry. You helped save a lot of people." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Jake, why did you save me? Your people and my people are enemies." Jake thought about his answer. "I lost my sister to Zephyrian raiders when she was young. I hated your people for a long time. And now I know that not all Zephyrians are raiders, just like not all humans are soldiers." He looked at her seriously. You're not my enemy, Lyra, you never were. Tears formed in her eyes. In my culture, when someone saves your life, you owe them a great debt. But I have nothing to give you. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you're okay. Over the next few weeks, Jake visited Lyra every day. He brought her books about human culture and answered her endless questions about Earth. She was curious about everything from human food to human music. In return, she taught him about Zephyrian customs and language. Jake learned that Lyra came from a family of rebels who opposed the Empire's cruel ways. Her parents had been killed for their beliefs, and she had been forced to hide her identity. She had been working as a medical assistant on the mining station, trying to help human workers who got injured. I always believed that humans and Zephyrians could be friends, she told him one day. My parents taught me that all intelligent beings deserve respect. That's a brave thing to believe when your people are at war with mine. Lyra smiled sadly. Sometimes being brave is the only choice you have. As Lyra got stronger, she helped human intelligence officers plan raids on Zephyrian bases. Her information led to the rescue of hundreds of human slaves and the capture of several important raider leaders. The war between humans and Zephyrians began to change because of what she shared, but not everyone was happy about Lyra's presence on Earth. Many humans still didn't trust her, even though she had helped them. Colonel Hayes visited her one day with bad news. Miss Lyra, he said formally, the Earth government has decided that you cannot stay here permanently. For security reasons, you will be moved to a neutral world where you can live safely. Lyra nodded sadly. She had expected this. I understand. When do I leave? Next week. A transport ship will take you to the Centauri station. When Jake heard the news, he was angry. She saved hundreds of human lives, and this is how we thank her? Dr. Chen put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Jake, it's the best they can do. Many people in the government still see her as a threat. Jake spent Lyra's last few days on Earth showing her around the city. They visited museums and parks. He took her to his favorite restaurant where she tried human food for the first time. She laughed at the strange tastes and textures, and Jake found himself laughing too. On her final night, they sat together in the hospital garden under the stars. Lyra looked up at the night sky with wonder. Thank you, Jake, she said softly. These have been the happiest weeks of my life. I'm going to miss you, Lyra. She turned to face him, her expression serious. She spoke several sentences in her own language, her voice formal and ceremonial. Then she stood up and bowed deeply to him. What did you just say? Jake asked. It is something important in my culture. Dr. Chen will explain it to you after I am gone. The next morning, Lyra left Earth on a transport ship. Jake watched from the observation deck as her ship disappeared into space. He felt like he was losing a friend he would never see again. Dr. Chen found him there an hour later. She asked me to tell you what she said last night. What was it? In Zephyrian culture, there is something called a life debt. When someone saves your life, you are bound to them forever. What Lyra said was a promise. She swore that someday she would repay the debt she owes you. Jake stared out at the empty space where Lyra's ship had been. She doesn't owe me anything. Dr. Chen smiled. Try telling that to a Zephyrian. They take their promises very seriously. 12 years had passed since Jake last saw Lyra. His hair was starting to show gray at the edges, and his face had more lines from years of squinting at star charts. He still flew cargo runs, but now he chose his jobs more carefully. Instead of just hauling supplies for money, he focused on humanitarian missions. Jake's ship, now called the Second Chance, carried medical supplies to plague-stricken colonies and food to settlements hit by natural disasters. Word had spread that Jake Morrison was the pilot who would go anywhere to help people. Even dangerous places other pilots avoided. His friend Tony still flew with him, though Tony complained more about their risky missions than he used to. They were currently heading to a mining colony that had been cut off by asteroid storms. You know, we could make twice as much money hauling luxury goods to the inner worlds, Tony said as he checked their cargo hold full of emergency rations. Money isn't everything, Tony. Easy for you to say. You don't have 3 kids to put through school. Tony sat down in the co-pilot chair. Though I have to admit this work feels more important. Jake smiled as he piloted the ship through the asteroid field. Remember when we used to just move cargo from point A to point B? Now we actually make a difference. Yeah. You've become a real hero, Jake. The whole galaxy knows about the human pilot who saved a Zephyrian and helped end the slave trade. Jake shifted uncomfortably. He didn't like being called a hero. I just did what anyone should have done. Most people wouldn't have risked their lives for an enemy alien. Face it, Jake, you're famous. It was true. Jake's name was known throughout human space and beyond. The information Lyra had provided years ago had led to major changes in the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire had collapsed, replaced by a democratic republic. Dozens of slave camps had been shut down and thousands of prisoners had been freed. Other alien species had seen what happened when humans showed mercy to their enemies. Several wars had ended when alien leaders decided to try peace instead of fighting. Jake didn't think he deserved credit for any of it. But people kept telling the story anyway. They delivered the emergency supplies to the mining colony and stayed for a few days to help with repairs. Jake enjoyed the physical work of fixing damaged equipment. It felt good to build something instead of just flying from place to place. On their way back to Earth, Tony was reading news reports on his tablet. Hey, listen to this. Ambassador Lyra of the Zephyrian Republic just signed another trade agreement. This one's with the Centauri Federation. Jake looked up with interest. Over the years, he had followed Lyra's career from a distance. After leaving Earth, she had become one of the most important political leaders in the galaxy. She had helped create the new Zephyrian government and negotiated peace treaties with dozens of species. She's done well for herself, Jake said quietly. Done well? Jake, she's basically the most powerful diplomat in known space. Every alien species trusts her because she helped humans when her own people were still fighting us. Tony looked at his friend curiously. Do you ever think about contacting her? Why would I do that? She has important work to do. I'm just a cargo pilot. Just a cargo pilot? Jake, you started all this. If you hadn't saved her, none of these peace treaties would exist. Jake shook his head. Lyra did all the hard work. She's the one who convinced people to change. What Jake didn't know was that Lyra thought about him every day. In her private office on the Zephyrian capital world, she kept a picture of Jake that Dr. Chen had sent her years ago. Whenever she faced a difficult negotiation or felt discouraged, she looked at that picture and remembered the human who had risked everything to save a stranger. Lyra had access to detailed reports about Jake's humanitarian missions. She knew about every colony he had helped and every life he had saved. Each story made her more certain that she had chosen the right person to dedicate her life to serving. In Zephyrian culture, a life debt could only be repaid in two traditional ways. The person who owed the debt could either save their savior's life in return, or offer their life in permanent service. But Lyra had decided on a third option, one that had never been tried before in her species' history. She had spent years preparing for this moment. The Zephyrian Republic was stable and prosperous. Peace treaties had been signed with most major powers. Trade relationships were bringing wealth to worlds that had known only war. It was time to repay her debt to Jake Morrison. Lyra called her assistant into her office. Please send a message to Earth's diplomatic corps. I want to arrange a meeting with Captain Jake Morrison. The cargo pilot? Ma'am, wouldn't it be easier to just send him a personal message? Lyra smiled mysteriously. No, this needs to be official. I want him brought to the orbital station for a high-level diplomatic conference. What should I tell him the conference is about? Tell him the Zephyrian Republic wants to discuss a new alliance with humanity. Don't mention that I specifically requested him. I want it to be a surprise. Her assistant looked confused but nodded. Yes, ma'am. I'll send the message immediately. After he left, Lyra walked to the window of her office and looked out at the bustling city below. Zephyrians and humans worked side by side in the streets, something that would have been impossible 12 years ago. Children of both species played together in the parks. It was the peaceful future she had dreamed of as a young rebel. But none of it would have been possible without one human simple act of kindness. Jake Morrison had seen past the differences between their species and treated her like a person who needed help. That moment of compassion had rippled across the galaxy, changing the lives of billions. Now it was time for Lyra to do something that would shock both their peoples. She was going to propose something that had never happened before in galactic history. The thought made her nervous but also excited. Jake deserved to know how important he was. He deserved to understand that his choice to save one alien had prevented a war that could have lasted for generations. Most importantly, he deserved to know that the frightened girl he had rescued had grown into a woman who wanted to spend her life making sure his sacrifice meant something. Lyra touched the picture of Jake on her desk. Soon, she whispered in English, practicing the words she would say to him. Very soon. Meanwhile, Jake received the message requesting his presence at the diplomatic conference. He read it 3 times, confused about why anyone would want a cargo pilot at such an important meeting. Maybe they need someone to haul supplies for the conference, Tony suggested. Maybe. It does seem strange, though. Jake filed the message away and forgot about it. He had no idea that in a few weeks his quiet life would change forever. Jake had never seen Earth Orbital Station Prime so busy. Military ships from a dozen different worlds were docked at the massive station. Diplomats and reporters hurried through the corridors, speaking in excited voices. Jake felt out of place in his simple pilot's uniform as he made his way to the meeting room. He still didn't understand why he had been invited to this conference. The message had said something about a new alliance between humans and Zephyrians, but Jake couldn't figure out what that had to do with him. Captain Morrison? A young officer approached him with a tablet. I'm Lieutenant Brown. I'll be escorting you to the conference room. Listen, I think there might be a mistake. I'm just a cargo pilot. I don't know anything about diplomacy. Lieutenant Brown smiled. No mistake, sir. You're specifically requested to attend this meeting. They walked through corridors filled with important-looking people. Jake recognized some faces from news reports. Generals, ambassadors, and politicians from across human space. Whatever was happening here was big. The conference room was enormous with a long table surrounded by dozens of chairs. Representatives from the human government sat on one side, while the other side was empty, waiting for the Zephyrian delegation. Jake was given a seat near the back, which suited him fine. General Sam Hayes, who had been promoted since Jake's trial years ago, stood at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to discuss a proposed alliance between humanity and the Zephyrian Republic. This could be the most important diplomatic agreement in our history. The doors to the conference room opened, and the Zephyrian delegation entered. Jake looked up casually, then froze. Leading the group was a tall, elegant woman with the pale skin and sharp features of a Zephyrian. But Jake recognized those large, dark eyes immediately. It was Lyra. She had changed dramatically in the 12 years since he'd last seen her. Gone was the frightened, injured girl he had rescued from the mining station. In her place stood a confident, powerful woman wearing the flowing robes of a high-ranking diplomat. Her white hair was styled in an elaborate pattern, and she carried herself with the grace of someone used to commanding respect. But when her eyes met Jake's across the room, her formal expression melted into a warm smile. She gave him a small nod as if to say, "Hello, old friend." Jake's heart started beating faster. He had followed her career from a distance, but seeing her in person brought back all the memories of their time together on Earth. She looked happy and successful, everything he had hoped she would become. General Hayes stood to greet the delegation. Ambassador Lyra, welcome to Earth Orbital Station Prime. We're honored to have you here. Thank you, General Hayes. I'm pleased to be here to discuss this historic alliance. Lyra's English was perfect now, with only the slightest accent to remind listeners that she wasn't human. The negotiations began immediately. Lyra presented a detailed proposal for cooperation between their two species. The alliance would include shared military defense, joint scientific research, and expanded trade relationships. It was ambitious and far-reaching. This agreement would make humanity and the Zephyrian Republic the most powerful partnership in the galaxy, Lyra explained. Together, we could bring peace and prosperity to dozens of worlds. The human representatives asked many questions about the details of the proposal. Lyra answered each one with patience and expertise. Jake was impressed by her knowledge and skill. The frightened girl he had once comforted had grown into one of the galaxy's most capable leaders. During a break in the negotiations, Lyra approached Jake's seat. The other humans in the room watched curiously as the famous ambassador walked over to speak with a simple cargo pilot. "Hello, Jake," she said softly. "It's good to see you again." Jake stood up and felt suddenly nervous. "Hello, Lyra. You look different." She laughed, and for a moment she sounded like the young woman he remembered. "I hope so. I was a mess when you found me. You were hurt and scared. Anyone would have looked like a mess." Jake studied her face, seeing both the girl she had been and the woman she had become. "I've been following your career. You've accomplished amazing things. I had a good example to follow. I heard about your humanitarian missions. You've saved a lot of lives, Jake. Before Jake could respond, General Hayes called for the negotiations to resume. Lyra returned to her seat, but she kept glancing at Jake throughout the afternoon. The discussions continued for 3 days. Jake watched as Lyra skillfully negotiated the terms of the alliance. She was patient but firm, making sure both sides got what they needed. It was clear that she truly cared about creating lasting peace between their peoples. On the final evening of the conference, Jake was walking back to his quarters when Lyra appeared beside him in the corridor. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" she asked. "I know a quiet restaurant on the station where we can talk privately." Jake nodded. "I'd like that." They found a small restaurant away from the busy diplomatic areas. Lyra had changed out of her formal robes into simpler clothes, and she looked more like the person Jake remembered. They ordered food and sat across from each other in a comfortable booth. "I want to thank you, Jake," Lyra said as they ate. "Everything I've accomplished is because you gave me a second chance at life. You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. You're the one who convinced people to change. Do you know what happened after you saved me? The information I provided led to raids on 17 slave camps. Over 3,000 humans were rescued. The Zephyrian Empire collapsed within 5 years, and we built a democratic republic in its place." Jake sipped his drink. "I know, I'm proud of you. But you still don't understand, do you?" Lyra leaned forward, her eyes intense. "None of that would have happened if you had left me to die on that station. Your choice to save one alien prevented a war that could have lasted for generations. I just did what felt right." "Exactly. You saw past the uniform of an enemy and treated me like a person who needed help. That simple act of kindness changed the course of history." They talked for hours about the years they had been apart. Lyra told him about the challenges of building a new government and negotiating with suspicious alien leaders. Jake described his humanitarian missions and the people he had helped. As the evening grew late, Lyra became quiet and thoughtful. Finally, she looked at Jake with a serious expression. "Jake, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been planning for a long time." "What is it?" Lyra took a deep breath. "Tomorrow, at the final session of the conference, I'm going to make an announcement. Both our delegations will be shocked by what I have to say." "What kind of announcement?" Instead of answering directly, Lyra reached across the table and took his hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, just as he remembered. "In my culture, a life debt can only be repaid in 2 ways. I can save your life in return, or I can offer you my life in permanent service." She looked into his eyes. "I've chosen a third option." Jake felt his heart racing again. "Lyra, what are you talking about?" She squeezed his hand gently. "Tomorrow I'm going to ask you to marry me." Jake stared at her in shock. "What?" "It's more than just a personal choice, Jake. A marriage between us would be the ultimate symbol of unity between our species. It would show the galaxy that humans and Zephyrians can be more than allies. We can be family." Jake's mind raced. "Lyra, that's incredible. But are you sure? You're one of the most important people in the galaxy. I'm nobody special." Lyra smiled and brought his hand to her lips, kissing it softly. "You're the most special person I know. You're the reason I'm alive, and you're the reason our peoples are at peace." She stood up from the table, still holding his hand. "Think about it tonight, Jake. Tomorrow, in front of representatives from across the galaxy, I'm going to ask you to be my husband. I hope you'll say yes." Jake watched her walk away, his mind spinning with the possibilities. Marriage to Lyra would change everything about his life. But as he thought about the woman she had become and the peace their union could represent, he realized his answer was already clear. Jake barely slept that night. He kept thinking about Lyra's proposal and what it would mean. By morning, he had made his decision. When the final conference session began, he was ready. The conference room was packed with diplomats, reporters, and military officers. Everyone expected Lyra to announce the final details of the human-Zephyrian alliance. Instead, she stood at the podium with a mysterious smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "before we sign this alliance, I have a personal announcement to make." General Hayes looked confused. The human delegation exchanged worried glances. What was the ambassador planning? Lyra's eyes found Jake in the crowd. 12 years ago, a human cargo pilot saved my life. His name is Jake Morrison, and he is here with us today. All eyes turned to Jake, who felt his face turn red. He had never liked being the center of attention. "Captain Morrison's act of mercy changed the course of galactic history," Lyra continued. The information I provided after he rescued me led to the collapse of the Zephyrian Empire and the creation of our peaceful republic. The room was completely silent. Everyone wondered where this was leading. In my culture, when someone saves your life, you owe them a debt that can never be fully repaid. I have spent 12 years trying to honor that debt by working for peace between our peoples. Lyra stepped down from the podium and walked toward Jake. Her formal expression softened into something much more personal. Today, I want to repay that debt in the most complete way possible. According to ancient Zephyrian law, I can offer my life in permanent service to the one who saved me. She stopped in front of Jake and dropped to one knee, just as humans did when proposing marriage. The entire room gasped in shock. "Jake Morrison," she said in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "Will you marry me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could hear his own heartbeat as he looked down at the most powerful diplomat in the galaxy kneeling before him. Then he smiled and took her hands in his. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll marry you, Lyra." The room exploded in noise. Some people cheered, others shouted in surprise or protest. General Hayes looked like he might faint, but Jake only saw Lyra's face as tears of joy filled her eyes. She stood up and kissed him gently. "Thank you," she whispered. The announcement sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Some humans were angry that their hero was marrying an alien. Some Zephyrians were upset that their leader was binding herself to a former enemy. But many more people saw it as a beautiful symbol of hope for the future. 6 months later, Jake found himself standing in a garden on Earth, wearing a formal uniform that felt strange and uncomfortable. Thousands of guests from dozens of worlds had come to witness the wedding. News cameras broadcast the ceremony to billions of viewers across the galaxy. Jake's friend Tony stood beside him as best man, grinning widely. "I still can't believe this is happening. My cargo pilot buddy is marrying the most famous diplomat in known space." "I'm nervous," Jake admitted. "What if I mess up the ceremony? What if I say the wrong thing? Jake, she asked you to marry her. I don't think she's going to change her mind because you stumble over a word or two." The music began and Jake turned to watch Lyra walk down the aisle. She wore a beautiful dress that blended human and Zephyrian traditions. Her white hair was decorated with flowers from both Earth and her homeworld. She looked radiant. As she approached, Jake felt all his nervousness fade away. This was right. After 12 years apart, they belonged together. The ceremony itself was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They exchanged vows in both English and Zephyrian. Jake had practiced his Zephyrian words for weeks, and he managed to speak them without too many mistakes. When Lyra spoke her vows in English, her voice was clear and strong. "Jake Morrison," she said, 12 years ago you saved my life when you had every reason to leave me behind. Today, I give you my life freely and completely. Until the stars go dark, I am yours." Jake recognized the words she had whispered when he first rescued her. Now he finally understood what they meant. "Lyra," he replied, "you've already given me more than I ever dreamed possible. You've shown me that enemies can become friends and that one small act of kindness can change the world. I promise to spend my life proving worthy of your love." When they kissed, the crowd erupted in celebration. Beings from across the galaxy cheered for the union that represented hope for a peaceful future. The reception was held in a grand ballroom that accommodated guests of many different species. Jake and Lyra danced to music that blended human and Zephyrian styles. They were surrounded by friends and family from 2 worlds. General Hayes approached them during a quiet moment. "I have to admit I was wrong about this marriage," he said. "Already 3 other alien species have requested diplomatic meetings with humanity. They want to see if they can achieve the same kind of partnership we have with the Zephyrians." Lyra smiled. "That was the plan, General. Sometimes the best diplomacy is leading by example." Dr. Chen, now elderly but still sharp, hugged them both. "I'm so happy for you two. I always knew that scared girl I treated would do something amazing with her life." As the evening wound down, Jake and Lyra found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Earth spread out below them, beautiful and peaceful. "Any regrets?" Lyra asked, taking his hand. Jake thought about his old life as a simple cargo pilot. It had been quiet and uncomplicated, but also lonely. Now he was married to the most remarkable woman he had ever met, and together they could help shape the future of the galaxy. "No regrets," he said, "but I have one request. Anything. I want us to keep doing the work we've always done. You with diplomacy, me with helping people who need it. This marriage doesn't have to change who we are. Lyra leaned against him, content and happy. Actually, I was hoping you'd say that. I have an idea for our honeymoon. Oh? There's a newly discovered species near the Vega system. They've never had contact with other worlds before. I thought we could be the first to meet them. Together. Jake laughed and kissed the top of her head. A diplomatic first contact mission for our honeymoon? That's the most romantic thing you could have suggested. Really? Really. We'll show them what humans and Zephyrians can accomplish when we work together. They stood together under the stars, planning their future. Neither of them could have imagined that a chance rescue on a damaged mining station would lead to this moment. But that was the beauty of compassion. You never knew how far its effects would reach. The next morning, they boarded Jake's ship, now renamed the Unity, and set course for the unknown. As they jumped into hyperspace, Jake thought about how much his life had changed. He was still a pilot and Lyra was still a diplomat, but now they were partners in every sense of the word. Where to after the Vega system? Jake asked as they traveled through the strange colors of hyperspace. Lyra consulted a star chart covered with notes about species that needed help. There's a civil war in the Centauri region we could mediate, and after that, there are refugees from a plague outbreak who need supplies and medical aid. Jake smiled as he watched the stars stream past their ship. They had work to do, a galaxy to help heal and a lifetime of adventures ahead of them. It was exactly the future he would have chosen. Behind them, the news of their successful first contact mission would inspire other species to reach out to their former enemies. The simple act of one human showing mercy to one alien continued to ripple outward, creating waves of peace that would spread across the galaxy for generations to come. And it all started because Jake Morrison had decided that helping someone in need was more important than following orders or playing it safe. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the universe, the courage to show compassion even to those who were supposed to be enemies.